What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
System. Most of the X5s on the market are with atmospheric 4.4 engines with 286 horsepower. At present times, for such a big car, it is literally base, it is perceived ordinarily. And braking system, under the article of tractive armament, simple, in front single piston calipers and discs in size 332/030mm. Now Bavarians put similar brakes on usual BMW 320. And top versions with 4, 6 and 4, 8 engines have 356/36mm discs and 2 piston calipers with a floating bracket on the front axle. Already more impressive, but also not record figures on the size and on a design, and at all are consumer goods. Please note, upgrade of the braking system by 356mm and 2 piston calipers is a very common phenomenon. Not that anyone lacks brakes, but second-hand sets are very cheap, and at the first repair the original ones are often replaced by improved ones. Sometimes they put in brake discs of larger diameter from E70. Motivation is obvious in wheel rims with diameter of 19 and more inches. Even 356mm brakes look ridiculously small. There are no special problems with maintenance, except that the original and top brands are now almost unavailable. The discs almost do not warp, all elements go for a long time, often more than 100,000, and with careful drivers, significantly more. On the rear axle the brakes are also disc brakes, but with a diameter of 324mm. The disc is ventilated in versions with 4.8, 4.6 and even in restyled 4.4 liters engines, the rest have unventilated ones. There is a single piston caliper, the handbrake mechanism is separate, with drum pads inside the disc, so everything is reliable. The handbrake is adjusted with a ratchet through the wheel bolt hole, and apart from this specific point has only one disadvantage. If it is not used as intended, the life of pads will be annoyingly short. The drive itself is strong and simple, with a conventional lever. No pedals, no electrics. By 15 years it is already worth to change the cable and the whole stuffing of the handbrake drum brake, it rots, especially the springs. However, it is comparatively simple operation, and it is possible to consider that brakes of the first X5 are ideal, reliable, effective, and not too expensive in service. Suspension, as we have already told, subframes here rust before a body, they need to be anti-corroded and washed from layers of dirt. Then they will keep geometry, and at the same time the steering rack will serve longer. When buying it would be good to check whether the subframe has already been welded at the seams. After 200 to 250,000 miles, the subframe supports will almost certainly have to be replaced. The front McPherson is surprisingly strong. The main elements can easily live up to 150 to 200,000 if the car was not driven over curbs and not put duct tape instead of the recommended wheels. The levers here are steel and their silent blocks are repressed. The main consumable besides stabilizer bars is a large silent block of the curve arm. It and the original goes usually less than 60 to 80,000 and not original and even less. It should be tightened strictly on the already standing car, any liberties of the mechanic lead to a quick breakdown. Slightly improve the situation allows installation of silent blocks from armored E38, they are solid and much stronger, even non-original. True, the comfort will suffer a little. There are tips to put apart from Range Rover at the same time, the owners of Range Rover prefer silent blocks from BMW. In general, there is no profit in his fatherland. Stabilizer props just need to choose qualitative and not to overload parking with diagonal dislocations. Failures of joints of suspension height sensors are a frequent trouble, but here everything depends more on climate. The rest of the components are almost exemplarily reliable. The front ball joint is replaceable, it is installed in the knuckle itself. But the rear ball joint is changed only in the assembly with the lever. However, this does not prevent some craftsmen from replacing only the ball, but the idea is meaningless. Non-original levers are inexpensive. And with quality performance of the cover and the presence of grease under it go for a long time. The strut support usually withstands 150 to 250,000. The resource strongly depends on the rubber and roads, but in general it is not a problematic part. Usually, the support bearing does not require replacement at all, and the sagging rubber element is replaced when repairing the strut. Shock absorbers and springs are also quite strong, but they are usually replaced when the mileage is well over 200. The main thing is that the dust covers on the rack remain intact, then the shock absorber has a good chance to depart a lot. In the rear suspension, everything is even more reliable, up to the mileage of more than 200,000. All connections of the lower arm are usually still original, as well as a thin straight arm. True, the lower support arm is aluminum, but it does not affect the durability, and the silent blocks in it are removable. The upper thin straight upper arm is also aluminum, the ball in it is one and not replaceable, but the unit serves long enough. The first to give up is the crooked upper arm, aka boomerang. It has both silent blocks that can be repressed. Usually there are problems with sticking of camber bolts, and the resource of rear hub bearings is not record-breaking, but in general, the suspension on the rear axle is strong and relatively inexpensive to rebuild at intermediate repairs. As an option, the car was equipped with air suspension. It can be on both axles. It is an option S221A in the catalogue, or only on the rear, and it is not Colhorse. The air tanks here are of a rather old-fashioned design, with a very large sleeve, and therefore relatively expensive, but in general, the system is no more troublesome than other old air suspensions. However, the chances of finding the car on the belly or with a roll in the morning are decent. There are a lot of weak connections. And taking into account the age of the car, you may encounter pump wear and valve block failures. The strut fittings also sometimes fail and can leak air even with a complete pneumatic hose. The main advice: if you need pneumatics, then immediately look for specialized services in the usual problems with it to eliminate expensive. Well, or you just should not be embarrassed by the prices for new original struts in a set of 200,000 for each. If so, I am glad that E53 still has such wealthy fans. But the secret of prices for some expensive cars on aftermarket is just that the owner just doesn't know that he threw $1 million into the wind. Steering a normal rack or a rack with servotronic is supposed to be a very reliable thing. But not in the case of BMW, when it is located directly in the subframe in a layer of dirt, many centimeters. Any breakage of anthers in such a situation is fatal, and they lose tightness because the clamps of covers rot. Well, and the dust cover on the steering shaft also suffers from dirt and shocks. As a result, with mileage under 200, many cars are sent to the service to repair the rack. And there, as luck would have it, in most cases it is possible to be limited to just new bushings and tightening, sometimes restoration of the lathe nut. But the lathe is hot enough, cooling of GUR oil is not excessive here, engines are heat-loaded, so all oil seals get old. And that means shrunken O-rings on the spool and leaks. Usually it makes sense to do a complete rebuild while the working pair of the rack is still serviceable. Transmission. Common problems traditionally for BMWs: the resilient PDO clutch and even the suspension bearing require regular checks and replacement as necessary. Drives sometimes tear, but even the 4.8i version is far from X5M, so there are no special problems with them. And traditionally, there are only external and only non-original ball joints on sale. Internal ones will have to be selected or to buy complete drives, as the manufacturer intended. There are Chinese ones at ridiculous prices. Manual transmissions: oddly enough, the E53 can be found with the ZF-GS6X53DZ 6-speed manual transmission. In theory, all 6-cylinder cars can be with a manual. These boxes are pretty sturdy if you keep an eye on oil levels and oil seals. The only real problem is a dual-mass flywheel with unpredictable resource. Someone has it goes hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and someone breaks and at a mileage of 30,000. At the price of 100,000 rubles, I would like stability and a greater resource. It is good that the flywheel is restored relatively budgetary. But the repair of MKP is very expensive. If you need something other than replacement of bearings and restoration of sharpness of clutch teeth, get ready to spend a lot of money. Used boxes are also not cheap, from 50,000 for a live unit. Automatic boxes: the main mass of cars is still equipped with automatics, 6-cylinder gasoline, as well as diesel before restyling. Were equipped exclusively with a 5-speed gearbox from GM of French manufacture. Gasoline 8 before the update also came with a 5-speed gearbox, but already ZF5 HP24. After the update, diesels and 8 began to be equipped with a 6-speed ZF6 HP26. The GM box, aka Punch, of the 5L50 or sometimes 5L40E series, the designation A5S390R can be any variant, is not a bad unit, although it has enough surprises. If the car was driven at a quiet pace, the box is very durable. But if you regularly spur the BMW, you can't avoid problems. First of all, the 5L50 has a rather weak torque converter. Unlike ZF boxes, it requires not only replacement of the GDT locking pads, usually in the range of 120 to 250,000 kilometers, as luck would have it. Sometimes there are vibrations, the overrunning clutch or bearings fail. Pedal oil pump in automatic transmission does not like high speeds and dirty oil, and especially the combination of one with another. And if the oil is also overheated, scoring will appear at once with subsequent gradual pressure drop. In addition, the oil pump is structurally complex, dirt collects in the channels of its body, and the bypass valves and their channels wear out. Wear of solenoids, especially of pressure regulation and GDT locking, is also active, and by 180 to 200,000 they are very likely to require replacement. Box heat exchanger is installed on the cold radiator tank, but the difficulties of such ATF cooling system are the same as when it is installed on the box itself. The heat exchanger clogs with time. You can try to wash it, but it is better to replace it at the first signs of overheating. The box thermostat is not very good either. Servicemen do not like 5L50 series boxes. Complaints about difficulties with installation of large pistons are not uncommon if there are no special sets of silicone guides and liquids for cooling pistons. They cannot be installed. Pressure surges when the pump wears out can easily get the whole set of frictions, bushings and plastic distance washers inside. Wear of the oil pump is manifested in jerks both at shifts and at even driving. It suddenly moves, then restore mobility of the box oil pump blades, which leads to pressure surges and affects the operation of not only frictions, but also the locking of the torque converter. If there are surges, then almost certainly the problems will soon add up. You should not delay with the repair. At the first call you should immediately go to the service. If the oil change is rare, the resource of the 5L50 box, as a rule, does not exceed 120,000. If you change the oil once in 30,000 and do not allow overheating, it can go through 250,000 and even more. The 5-speed ZF5 HP24 is better in many ways. Moreover, for the 4.6 engine, it has been slightly strengthened. But on the mechanical part there are some unpleasant moments. At runs under 200,000 kilometers because of a strong wear of a rear thrust bearing of hub A there is a backlash of a drum A. Working protrusions and seals are destroyed, the piston of a package is torn. The pressure in the C-reverse package drops due to overloading and wear of the bushing on its shaft. All this is manifested in hard engagement of drive mode, pauses and slippage when shifting from the second to the third gear. The result of overgazovka when switching on reverse and slippage when shifting 2 to 3 gears is often a rupture of the drum A, and it can no longer be repaired. But even if you immediately come to the service, the repair is not cheap. The drum usually requires replacement, the bushing and bearing are installed. Repair, the shaft is polished. Another common mishap is a ruptured F piston. This is a design feature, but is usually caused by overheating. In parallel, there is also a failure of the plate. A crack appears on it, but here ordinary welding helps. The torque converter serves 200 to 250,000 before replacement of the lock-in plates, but the resource depends little on the style of driving, and there are practically no other breakdowns at GDT. Because of this, it is highly recommended for 5HP24 to have an intermediate repair just by mileage with replacement of thrust bearing and bushing. This reduces to zero the chances that the roller from the worn bearing will fall out and arrange Stalingrad in the box. It is worth listening to the recommendation of experienced Bimerovity and use synthetic oil Dextran 3 and change it more often. But you should not believe that branded oil does not require changing. We told about 6-speed ZF6 HP26 in detail in the material about the Jaguar XF BMW X3, so here we will limit ourselves to conclusions. Strong mechanical part and a lot of troubles with natural wear, high complexity of mechatronics and high prices for repairs once again emphasize how expensive in service will be E53 after restyling. From pluses, drift has little influence on oil and bagel resource. It is possible not to refuse in anything, and the box works very quickly and clearly. All-wheel drive. The drive is realized through a transfer case, the functionality of which can vary significantly. Pre-restyling was equipped with transfer cases with interaxle differential and permanent all-wheel drive series in V125 and LWX 500. The latter were standard for cars with 4.6 engines, but there are also petrol 4.4 and diesel engines. After restyling, the drive was made automatically connected through friction. Transfer case here is model ATC 500. However, the old NV125 could be used with a 3-liter gasoline engine until 2005. The NV125 transfer case is a reliable thing, but with mileage over 200 the chain wear starts to affect and small jerks appear. Extension of the chain is minimal, but it has no tensioning system, so even the slightest wear leads to the appearance of shock load. The original chain HV059 is usually changed to a reinforced HV087 from more powerful handouts. And in turn, the shock load achieves the second weak point of the transfer case, splines of the output shaft to the front axle. They already corrode very actively, and any overload on older cars leads to their shearing. The problem is solved in several ways. The most correct way is to install a repair spline part on the cardan, which is suitable for many old cardan and drives, for example, from E39. And you can put an extended spline part, and the load in the meshing will be reduced. Simultaneously change the output shaft with a gear, and it can even be bought non-original. They serve quite normally. The price, however, bites a minimum of 18 to 30,000, depending on the manufacturer. Installing a spacer gimbal to drive it deeper into the spline part of the shaft is also a proven option. Factory assembly does not provide for the use of the entire plane of splines, which can be used. Of course, the strength will not be the same, but for some time this solution is enough. If you do it before the splines crack, it is just a great way to avoid expensive repairs. The second option is to install a new spline part of the cardan with an extension. This is a little more expensive, but it strengthens the connection and makes it no less reliable than the factory one. In this case, you do not need to rebuild the transfer case. Frankly, barbaric methods with welding the edge of the shaft in a circle for crimping splines and drilling for a pin are also found, as well as simple welding of shafts. They say the surprises from such repairs are unforgettable. The LWX 500's reinforced transfer case has exactly the same spline problems as the NV125, even though it has an inherently stronger chain and bearings. In addition, the output shaft on it is far less common, and a full repair is difficult. ATC 500 also has problems with splines, but in city cars they still go longer, and in motion breakdowns are not noticeable at all. Because the front axle after mileage of 100 to 150,000 often simply does not connect. It is interesting that this transfer case has clearly traced familiarity in breakdowns. Besides troubles with splines, there is also a problem with chain wear, also not very pronounced, but inevitable. The chain here is reinforced HV087, which was also used on NV125. But otherwise there are no improvements. Normal chain tensioners have not appeared. Fortunately, Chinese shoes with tension adjustment are available. The weak point of the transfer case is the front axle connection mechanism. Even its external part with plastic gears of the gearbox has a limited service life and serves as the main cause of front drive failure in restyled cars. But it doesn't end there. Inside the box, the external drive rotates the shaft, which spreads moving forks already on the clutch itself. Forks in turn have spacer rollers, which compress the friction package on the axis. The forks have two thrust roller bearings. Not that they break often, but in case of breakage they tend to fall out, and strong needles get into the chain and crumble everything inside the transfer case. If there is a rumble when connecting the front axle, it is almost certainly necessary to change not only the chain, but also the bearings. With mileage over 250,000 kilometers, almost all cars will have such repair, and the most ardent racers' transfer cases serve twice less. The situation is aggravated by the fact that spare parts are not cheap. But there is one more trick. Instead of ATC 500 you can put ATC 700 from E70. It is stronger, more common, cheaper and noticeably newer. It has a better chain and locking mechanism. True, the oil in this transfer case needs to be changed more often, but it's hardly a big problem. Motors. Common problems: all engines are powerful and hot, even diesels have high operating temperatures. The N-series engines are even hotter after restyling, and they have even higher demands on the quality of the cooling system. Any failures of afterheaters in thermostats or fans, as well as cracks in the plastic for them, end badly. Engines are extremely sensitive to overheating. Even old M54B30 suffer from warping of the cylinder head and block when the operating temperature is exceeded. And in aluminized units, scoring, cracked piston bridges and cracks in the cylinder heads between the valve seats and in the blocks between the cylinders are commonplace. Cooling system maintenance is not just replacement of the expansion tank cap once a year, but a serious set of measures including control of the operation of all fans, cleaning and maintenance of radiators, preventive replacement of all pipes with signs of cracks and cloudy plastic, regular monitoring of the coolant level and its condition. Therefore, all modifications of thermostats and ECU aimed at reducing the operating temperature are very popular. This allows you to greatly reduce maintenance costs, extend the life of all seals, plastic, heater valves and the same phase regulators and heat exchangers. The thermostat at 85 degrees is a cornerstone of resource for any BMW motor. Finally, a lot of censures cause the work of fuel pumps. Due to the age, the resource of original ones is coming to an end and there are variants of selection. Unexpectedly, gasoline engines have problems with the fuel pressure regulator. The original one ceases to hold pressure, and it also needs to be replaced. Gasoline engines: the inline-six M54 is the most desirable motor on the X5 now. The thing is that with it the cost of car maintenance is noticeably lower. Curl your fingers, it is pre-tax, at the same time quite attractive and relatively simple in design. Almost any repair doesn't require engine removal, and fuel consumption is quite sane. And most importantly, the cast iron liners forgive many mistakes: bad oil, elevated temperatures, overflowing injectors and loads on cold. For those who want to use it, there is a lot of tuning, up to turbo kits, with which you can relatively inexpensively increase the power to 280 and more forces and get dynamics at the level of the stock serviceable 4.4. Flaws? There are plenty of those, too. Thus, with the standard thermostat at 97 degrees, the motor is very picky about oil and well coking from the inside. You can't avoid oil spoilage if you delay oil change intervals, and even more so if you overheat the engine. Due to air suction at the plastic manifolds and numerous pipes, it loses a lot of traction, and combined with the aging of gaskets from temperature, it's just a constant headache. You need to fix everything at once. The Varno system phase control clutches require regular maintenance with replacement of O-rings and more. Diagnostics is of little help here. It usually does not show in dynamics how they lose characteristics. Shaft sensors don't live long either. An intake manifold with diesel length change system is easier to buy a new one than to repair. Knocking hydrocompensators, cylinder deactivation, ignition misses, oil leaks from the oil pan and caps, regular replacement of the drain valve in the oil pan. It's all about the M54 too. With the M50 thermostat, updated Varnos, eliminated suction and leaks, new DESA, and updated crankcase ventilation system, the chances of breakdowns are greatly reduced. The total resource of the unit and without that can exceed 300 to 400,000 kilometers, and with eliminated trifles, it will not bother with breakdowns to complete wear. During overhaul, many services recommend to put pistons with a finalized oil drain. So the motor becomes less sensitive to its quality, but it is hardly necessary. But to get an oil pressure gauge or to put an emergency sensor instead of 0.3 to 1 bar is a very good advice if the motor has not been overhauled for a long time. Usually, such motors are sent for overhaul because of backed liners, and it is better not to get to that point. Crankshafts are expensive here. Often pressure leakage is provoked by overheating. Due to warping of the cylinder head, oil leakage starts at the joint between the camshaft bed and the cylinder head itself, and the capacity of the oil pump is not sufficient to compensate for it. Another cause of damage to the liners is often a relatively long time of filling the oil cup at startup. The point is that the drain valve needs to be changed regularly. In addition, over time, in the place of its installation, there is a buildup that needs to be eliminated. In general, the problem is quite easy to detect. If after a day of idle time in the glass of the oil filter, the oil level drops by a third, then the valve must be changed urgently. Otherwise, you will get the crankshaft at every startup, and if you have a bad habit of not warming up the engine and immediately turn on drive after startup, the chances of friendship fist will be maximum. But the oil spoilage due to lodged rings has long ago learned to reduce Raskixovka almost completely. Well, and replacement of oil caps is also not the most expensive operation in comparison with overhaul. In general, the motor is legendary, but it has enough peculiarities for a separate article. A typical rider can easily finish it. There are enough contract engines in decent condition. And here live M62 and N62 are 4, 6 and 4, 8 liters are frankly not enough. And this is the main reason that so many beautiful X5 E53 are so cheap, despite the gorgeous condition of bodies, equipment and general level of the car. And, believe me, the amount of tax here is far from the most unpleasant. All the same 38 to 45,000 rubles now let an essential, but far not so principal payment for possession of 5. Why there is not enough used motors? It would seem that V8 of these series from Bavarians put on a lot of models for a very long time. Resource they have a large, there is no natural wear of the piston, after all, it is a Lucille. But nuances with service are even more than in 3-liter 6, and any problem if not fatal, then simply costs very expensive. Motors of M62 series are heirs of M60 series, but with higher operating temperature, equipped with phaser regulators and new injection. Among the interesting features is the presence of a water-cooled alternator. And the external housing of the generator is a casting in the front cover of the timing chain, so it is extremely difficult to put the usual one. Not so long ago, we published a piece on the Range Rover 3 and we looked at these engines in some detail. There are no differences in the motors on the X5. Exactly the same constant knocking Vanos, the generator is the same expensive, still the same need to monitor the wear of the long guide in the timing and do not allow it to wear to the metal. Overheating is always somewhere near, and it is only necessary to forget about constant control of all indicators, to drive longer. On old oil, not to replace the expansion tank cap and not to wash radiators, and the meeting with it is provided. On this engine everything is relatively simple. It is enough to change the thermostat for a cold one from S62 or M60 for hot countries and the problems will become less in times. The radiator fan here is driven through a viscofluid, and if it is serviceable, then after the thermostat replacement the temperature will rarely rise above par. And dynamics will improve noticeably. In the stock state the motor is overheated and drives not much better than a 3-liter one. It is possible to operate the car with such an engine under two conditions: the thermostat is set cold and the block is either in perfect condition or is already qualitatively cast iron. There are plenty of gilts in the X5 population, almost half of the owners claim they are fine with it already. But when inspecting I recommend to take a magnet on a thin leg for control. And, of course, endoscope inspection is obligatory. Sellers will say anything as long as the buyer takes the car and does not haggle. The N62 series engines with one letter difference are seriously different from the M series. They have a completely different piston group. The pistons have a thin boxed oil ring and only 2 oil drains on each side. The timing mechanism is all new, with separate slim chains to each cylinder head instead of one 2-row common chain. There's an electric main fan, plastic cylinder head covers, different injectors, ECU and intake manifold. Operating temperature is 105 to 107 degrees instead of 97, and a bunch of smaller scale changes. In the N62 series, the Vanos no longer knock constantly. Here they work clearly and quietly until mileage of 120 to 150,000. On this motor, the alternator is better, it is simpler and more reliable. But cylinder scoring, wear of valve guides, breakage of piston jumpers, problems with the cylinder head and scoring of liners are many times more frequent. There's a lot more soot inside, too. But, perhaps, there is one more plus: the motor with 6-speed automatic transmission began to consume a couple of liters less fuel. As long as it is in good working order, of course. Alas, it happens not so often. Either the injector power relay in the ISB block fails, or the injectors, or the ECG floods the intake with oil. From all of the above, it is clear that the diagnosis of N62 should be more thorough and the chances of a long and happy life with it are less. Here you can't get away with replacing the thermostat, the problems are more difficult to treat. But for this motor there is an easy way: installation of a contract 4.8 from E70. They are newer and there are still quite a lot of them. Costs a used motor for 100,000, but the original pistons, rings and liners alone with a set of gaskets for overhaul will cost a lot more. The chances of killing a new engine are also not small, but so far the owners enthusiastically roll out their resource. Many do not even change thermostats and do not update firmware on cold because N62 does not lose much in dynamics with overheating. Diesel motors M57 and M57TU are among the best engines of BMW, and in comparison with all V8 they are just a miracle of resource and unkillability. Of course, overheating happens with them too, but diesels are not that hot in principle, so the main reason is rather that owners forget about radiator maintenance, and under prolonged high load the motor does boil over. The main problems with both series motors are vortex flaps, which many recommend just removing. The damper pulley is weak, the motor's electrical supports are expensive and wear out, and the ECG is finicky. The TU motors have cracked plastic intake manifolds and the injectors are almost beyond repair. But in general, the fuel equipment is fairly stable and used injectors are inexpensive. The same problems with the oil pan as in the M54 are present here. Well, scoring of liners also happens. The motor does not like oil overheating and its pressure should be watched too. Against the background of problems with gasoline motors it seems not so difficult. In addition, you should carefully monitor the fuel equipment well, and turbocharging requires a higher culture of maintenance. The total cost of operation is not much lower than that of M54 motors, but fuel savings at high mileage is significant and dynamics is better, especially with a 6-speed automatic transmission after restyling. The total resource of diesel motors can exceed 500,000, but to reach such indicators, as usual, can not all, but only the most pedantic and careful owners. To take or not to take? If you have a heart for such cars, you can certainly buy an X5. But you can't get away with just one soul, you must have money for repairs in your pocket, and when choosing a car, you will have to shell out money to find a still alive copy. Now these cars are already at such an age that they do not tolerate riders, and the chances of a ride and discount are about zero. If you have fallen in love with the model and certainly want to buy X5 on a roll of an everyday car, then try to look for a copy with a 6-cylinder engine. Well, or in extreme case find those who can weld it to you. With V8 risks are higher, even if it is gusseted, and in case of restyled cars, even higher. Remember that the GM box doesn't like fast driving, and the ZF variants don't like maintenance savings. All in all, if it seems to you that every careless step can turn out to be a problem, you don't think so. BMW X5 of the first generation is a typical example of the old premium. You should not only like it very much, but also understand very well how your purchase may turn out. In conclusion, the BMW X5 I presents a unique blend of luxury and performance, but it comes with its own set of challenges. The expensive air suspension offers a smooth ride, yet it can be a costly maintenance concern. The straightforward brake system may lack some of the advanced features found in newer models, but it remains reliable. Lastly, the surprises of hot motors remind us to stay vigilant about engine health. Overall, while the X5 I is a compelling choice for enthusiasts, potential buyers should weigh these factors carefully to ensure it aligns with their expectations and budget. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more insights on automotive topics.